Well, I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 12. Trying to get over the holidays and got another one to come. So, appreciate you being here tonight. We're looking at Matthew chapter 12. We're going back to our study. We're actually introducing a new study starting tonight in we're starting at verse 9. Chapter 12, verse 9. We've been walking through in the past year. We've walked through Matthew chapter 11 and have moved into chapter 12. And another part of the section, of course, is this verse 9 that goes down through verse 14, which is a second story that Matthew gives us concerning the Sabbath day. And it's an amazing, interesting story. We want to take time to read it. So we're looking at Matthew chapter 12, verse 9. Now when he had departed from there, he went into their synagogue. And behold, there was a man who had a withered hand, and they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? That they might accuse him. Then he said to them, What man is there among you who has one sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, Stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and was restored as whole as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and plotted against him how they might destroy him. Let's pray together. Above all, we want your truth. We have no soapbox. We have no pet theology. We have no agenda. We have no hobby horse to ride. We want you and the reality of your truth. We know that the only way we can have that is you have to come and reveal your word to us. So we're asking you, Jesus, to go beyond this guy and go beyond this congregation and to somehow move in the power of your Spirit in the word until there would be a revelation that would go far beyond anything that we say, and that something would happen within us, within our own mind and our own heart, and we would see truth. You alone can get that done. So we're asking you for that tonight, and we're submitting to whatever you want to say. And we pledge this to you, Jesus. If you would speak to us tonight, we will submit. We will obey. We will leap to the occasion. We will say yes with all of our being if you would speak to us tonight. To that end, we commit these moments in Jesus' name. Amen. Context really matters, and of course the context is this whole chapter 11. And as you thunder into the end of chapter 11, what you discover is this spatial message, a shift in the ministry of Jesus, actually. And the shift has to do from ministering to the multitudes of Jews who now have rejected him and moving into, hey, one-on-one, anybody, anywhere, hey, just come to me. And what you end up with in verse 28 is the outstretched arms of Jesus. This is chapter 11, verse 28. The outstretched arms of Jesus inviting you to come, inviting anybody, any place. And as we've remarked often, the usage of the pronoun I and me in verse 28, 29, and 30 is just phenomenal. You are obviously being invited to come to Jesus alone. Not to a theology, not to a church building, not to an organization. You are being invited to come to the person of Jesus Christ as if he is the solution to every need of your life. And of course, he backs that up by verse 27 of chapter 11 by saying, All things have been delivered to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Father except the Son, and the one to whom the Son wills to reveal him. So obviously, the one who has had all things delivered to him is turning to you and saying, hey, come to me. Now, who is he inviting to come? Oh, we've talked about this so often. In verse 28, it's the ones who labor and are heavy laden. And the word labor there, you'll remember, means totally, absolutely exhausted. If you got your life together, if everything's cool with you, if you've got more time on your hands than you know what to do with, if you are so rested you wish you had something to do, if you've got all the strength you have and have all the victory you want, you don't need this tonight. Don't know why you're here. But if you are exhausted, if life has worn you out, if you've been beaten to death, if you say, oh my Jesus, is there a moment of peace any place? Then this is for you. Come to me. It's an amazing invitation. Now it's interesting that this invitation is not an invitation to escape. In other words, he isn't saying, come and I'll pick you up and you won't have to move, you won't have to get involved, you won't have to stretch, you won't have to feel anything. You just, hey, kick off your shoes, lean back in your lazy boy recliner. This is not an escape from your problems, from the pressures of your life, from the situations. This is a linkage with his person. Because he says, come to me and I will give you rest. And how will he do that? Take my yoke, which is a linkage. A linkage. So if you are trying to lift everything by yourself, why are you doing that? He wants to come and lift with you, and with his amazing strength, it'll be rest. It'll be no problem at all. Wouldn't it be something if Jesus would come and get in the middle of your problems with you and make them cease to be problems? Wouldn't it be interesting if Jesus could come and get in the middle of your situation and a problem would turn into an opportunity? Is he capable of doing that? Could he take the worst thing that's going on in your life and get right in the middle of it and interject his sourcing and power into that until it would be utilized to actually change your life, literally win your world? Phenomenal. That's the call. It's a linkage, not an escape. Now, he moves us out of that context of rest, calling us to rest, calling us to linkage with him. He calls us to that kind of rest. Then Matthew moves us into chapter 12. And in chapter 12 are these two stories. They're stories about the Sabbath day. And of course, the whole Sabbath day concept is a concept of rest. The very word Sabbath means rest, ceasing from your labor, ceasing from work. So what he's literally doing is he's contrasting the Pharisees' idea of rest over against Jesus' idea of rest. What is the concept that Jesus has when he talks about rest for you? What is the concept that the Pharisees have when they talk about rest for you? Pharisees talk about rest in terms of quit working one day. It is a ceasing, get out of, escape from, and isolate yourself in one single day. It's a wiping your hands and getting out of one single day. It's a Sabbath rest. Jesus says, not interested in that at all. What I'm interested in is I'm interested in linking with you and supplying until your life is restful. And the contrast is established. Now, he does it in these two phenomenal stories. And we spent years dealing with the first one. It wasn't that long, it just seemed like it. But it's from verse 1 down through verse 8, which is the story of the grain fields, which is given to us in verse 1 through 8. Now, just to review the story with you. Jesus is in verse 1 is going through the grain fields on the Sabbath day. And his disciples are hungry. But we've discovered around here, disciples are always hungry. So they reach out, pluck the heads of the grain, which is not illegal. They have a right to do that, and to eat. So they're not stealing grain. They are simply have the right, according to Jewish law, if they're hungry, to pick the grain. They have broken the Sabbath day law, as we've discussed, 4 times. This would be legitimate to do any other day of the week, but not on the Sabbath day. And so when they do it on the Sabbath day, they have literally broken the Sabbath day law 4 times. First of all, they pick the grain, which is reaping. You cannot reap a crop on the Sabbath day. So that That is bad. Secondly, they've rubbed it in their hands, which is thrashing, and you cannot thrash on the Sabbath day. Third, they've blown the chaff away after the thrashing, and that is winnowing, and you cannot do that on the Sabbath day. Then they plucked it into their mouth, and obviously the way disciples are, they eat too much, therefore they broke the Sabbath day law by eating too much. So they broke the Sabbath. We can stone them to death 4 times over this. And so the Pharisees are asking in verse 2, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day. That's the setting. Now we move to verse 9, where there is another story given to us about the Sabbath day. The whole scene changes. It's not in the grain fields now. It's in the place of worship. In fact, in verse 9, you'll note, when he had departed from there, he went into their synagogue. So this takes place in the church. So we've moved from the grain field to the church. Now, you'll remember the outline we gave in for chapter 12, verse 1 through 8. The outline is, verse 1 and 2 is the situation, which we've already talked about. Then in verse 3, down through verse 7, you have this sample. He gives 3 little stories to give illustrations of the truth that he's trying to tell them. So it's the sample. Then in verse 8, he gives this sum, which is the truth of everything he's been trying to say. Now, it's interesting that the same outline follows through into the story we've read tonight, which begins at verse 9. You start with the situation, which is verse 9 and verse 10. Now, the situation is they've gone into the synagogue, and there is a man there with a withered hand. Obviously, the Jews are out to trick Jesus or trap him. In fact, it says that they might accuse him. So they come up to Jesus, and the reason they think this will work is because they know him, which is interesting. They know him and the kind of person he is, and that he's always pouring his life out for someone else. So they figure this will work. So they ask the question, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? And they did that they might accuse him. Then in verse 11 down through verse 13, you have the sample. He tells this story about a man and a sheep falling into the ditch. And of course, if it's in the ditch, hey, he's going to get it out and save his sheep. Well, sure he is. Why? Because there's money involved. And even if it's on the Sabbath day, he's going to do that because the sheep has value, and he will not lose his sheep, even if it's the Sabbath day. Jesus says, how much more valuable is a man than your sheep? You treat your dog better than you treat your neighbor. What's wrong with you? That's the truth. Then he moves us into this last part, which is actually, and heals the man. And in verse 14, actually the end of verse 13 and 14, he literally gives the sum. Well, it's actually the end of verse 12. Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath day. He heals the man, and then the Pharisees plot against him how they might destroy him. So you got these 2 stories. Now, what we want to look at tonight, giving you that little introduction, what we want to look at, if you got this whole setting in your mind, what I want to look at tonight is verse 9, which is the beginning of this setting. Oh, man, I want you to get this. Now, when he had departed from there, he went into the synagogue. Now, I know this is going to excite you because you love this kind of thing. When he had departed from there, when he had departed, metabaino is the Greek word. It's a participle, so it's not the main verb. And it literally means to change places. And since it's a participle, it modifies Jesus, who's the subject. He is the subject, and obviously it's referring to Jesus. So Jesus departed. In other words, it's the departing Jesus. So get the picture. They're in the grain fields, and Jesus departs from the grain field and goes to the synagogue. So the way they describe that is, he's the departing Jesus. Now, the main verb in verse 9 is the verb went, which is a special word, erkomai, which is a spatial verb which focuses on coming, not departing. There is a verb that focuses on departing, and the emphasis is he left that place, but not this verb. This verb focuses on where he's going. So he's a Jesus who vacated one spot and on purpose focused on and went to this synagogue, to the place of worship. Very significant. A departing Jesus who's gone to a synagogue. Now, at first you would think, oh, I know what he's doing. He's escaping from the situation of the grain field. After all, there's a lot of pressure there. The Pharisees are breathing down his neck. They are after him. They are wanting to trap him. They are wanting to undermine him, and they're doing it by criticizing his disciples over the issue of picking grain on the Sabbath day, and they think they're going to undermine his entire ministry and embarrass him before the whole crowd. So they're focused on him, and Jesus is departing from that scene, wiping his hands of those Pharisees, and off he goes, and he'll go down to the church, which is safe. See, down at the church, there's no criticism. Down at the church, everybody loves you. Down at the church, everything is smooth. Down at the church, everything is wonderful. Down at the church, there's peace. Down at the church, there's love. Down at the church, there is melody in the air and sitting on the seat. But there's this melody. So everything is nice in the synagogue. But you know that's not the scene. That's not the scene. Jesus is not escaping from anything. In fact, the same Pharisees that are in the grain field are now in the place of worship. In fact, the same controversy that he's doing battle over in the grain field is the same identical circumstances are different. We're not talking about grain now. We're talking about a withered hand, but it's the same controversy of the Sabbath day. It was in the grain field. Now it's in the place of worship. What he's confronted with in the grain field, he's confronted with in the place of worship. The controversy of the grain field is the controversy of the place of worship. The same identical people with the same identical attitudes, with the same identical critical spirit, with the same identical critical looks are in the grain field. Oh, they're in the synagogue, the place of worship too. So what you are in the grain field is what you are in the place of worship. Did you hear me? There is a spiritual principle here. Learn it. There is no difference between the grain fields and the place of worship. Now, you have no idea how hard that is for me to grasp because I've had 90 years of training that that's not true. Which means I have to unlearn 90 years. Because every day of my life growing up in the church, I've had the opposite taught to me. Probably not you. You had a good church. But I've always been taught there's a difference between the grain field and the church. What you do at the church is different than what you do in the grain field. The situation of the grain field is not the same as the church. The church is the church. The place of worship is the place of worship. The grain field is the grain field, and the two forever shall be separate. For instance, I'm a kid. On Monday, it was my responsibility after school to come to the church and help clean up the church from Sunday morning. They left the bulletins all over the place, which is why we don't have bulletins, because you would leave them. We know you would. So we just don't have them. Then we don't have to pick them up. So my responsibility was to come, put the books in the right place, hey, pick up the bulletins, hey, straighten things up, and help clean up the church. I'm just a kid. So I'm in the sanctuary. This is Monday. Come on. This is Monday. This is like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. This is after school. I mean, nothing's going on. I mean, there's nobody playing the organ. I mean, there's nobody praying. I mean, come on. This is Monday. We're cleaning up the church. I'm whistling. It's a good thing to whistle. Not in the sanctuary! Somebody yelled at me. It was like God came down from above and yelled at me, don't whistle in the church! I turned around. There she stood with her finger. Now, it's all right to whistle in the grain fields. That's true. It's not all right to whistle in the sanctuary. Because the place of worship is the place of worship, and the grain field is altogether different. And there are what you do what you do in the grain field, but you don't do that in the place of worship. And there are things you do in the place of worship that you don't do in the grain field. You've got to learn that. In fact, our church was so strong on this, that we wanted to have family fellowship, but we couldn't have it in the church sanctuary. So we built buildings on the other side of the parking lot, not connected to the church. So we could eat over there and come over here to worship. But you cannot bring food into this place, and you cannot drink that filthy narcotic called coffee in this place. Why? Because it's all right to do it across on the other side of the property in a building over there, but you can't do it here. Why? This is the place of worship. What you do in the place of worship is altogether different than what you do over. Because the grain field is the grain field, the place of worship is the place of worship, and they are forever different. And what you do in one, you can't do in the other. Keep them separate. Can't laugh in the place of worship either. Now, you understand that there are jokes that you can tell out there in the grain field, but you must not tell that joke here. It's okay out there. It's just a little. I mean, you probably don't want to tell it with the women around. And you sure wouldn't tell it in Sunday school class, and you wouldn't tell it in the place of worship, and you wouldn't expect the preacher to give it across the pulpit. But out there, it's okay. Why? Because out there is the grain field, and the grain field is the grain field, the place of worship. Someone jokingly looked at me and said, lying, and you're in the church too. Like it was double worse to lie here. I mean, you go to hell and burn for lying in the grain field. If you do it in the church, you burn twice. Burn, baby, burn. I'm not sure you're getting this. Because the grain field is the grain field, the church is the church. And never the two shall meet. Taught that all my life. This is going to be interesting, isn't it? Because, ladies and gentlemen, there is no difference between the grain field. That's what he's telling us. There is no difference between the grain field and the place of worship. In fact, that's what the whole previous story is about. Let me back you up. Let me take you back to verse 3 of chapter 12, the previous story, and move into this. You see, they're in the grain field. See the scene. They're in the grain field. They pick this grain. Oh, they're hungry. They pick this grain, rub it, blow the chaff away, stick it in their mouth. Oh, the Pharisees are after them. You cannot do that. Why? It's on the Sabbath day, and you're breaking the Sabbath day law. Jesus tells 3 stories in answer to that. The first one you'll remember is about the showbread, verse 3. Look at it. Have you not read what David did when he was hungry? He and those who were with him. How he entered the house of God and ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priest. Now, what's the scene? Well, David, you'll remember, and we've told this story a dozen times, but David, you'll remember, he's hiding out. He's been running from King Saul, who's out to kill him. And he's been running with about 300 men, or a group of young men, and they've been hiding for 3 or 4 days and have had absolutely nothing to eat, and they're about to starve to death. They come into this place called Nob, and whoop, there's the tabernacle, the sacred tabernacle, which would be equal to the synagogue here. So here's the place of worship. And they go up to the priest and say, do you have anything for us to eat? No, don't have a thing, except the showbread. Now, what's the showbread? 12 loaves of bread that are baked fresh and put on the altar. They stay there all week long. Then on the Sabbath day, they take them off, and a fresh batch of 12 loaves, are one for each tribe, set on the altar. Now think about it. Why would you take showbread, beautiful home-baked bread with butter melted on the top, why would you take that and put it on an altar and let it sit there for a week? Does God eat? No. He never eats it. Well, it's an offering for God. No, it's not. It sounds to me like the whole deal is that a bunch of preachers got together and said, how can we get some free bread? We'll develop this thing, showbread, and then we'll take it and eat it. And the priest would take it and eat it and got free bread that way. So this is a con from preachers, no doubt about it. Except when you study it through, you find out God told him to do that. Oh, brother. I got the preachers off the hook. So God wanted 12 loaves. Why would he want 12 loaves? Where did these loaves come from? The grain field. They're a product of the grain field. What is God doing? He's taking the grain field and he's dragging it in and putting it on the sacred altar, because there is a linkage, he says, between the worship place and the grain field. And that what you do in the grain field, I'm bringing into the sanctuary. Where does the bread come from? It comes from the grain field. Why does he place it on the altar? It is a demonstration of the connection between the grain field and the place of worship. What's your grain field? Well, your place of work. What's your grain field? Well, your school where you go to. What's your grain field? Well, it's your place outside of the... We're going to take all that's going out there in your grain field, we're going to bring it in here and put it on the altar. Does it fit? Do you feel comfortable with that? Your lifestyle in the grain field, let's bring it in here and put it on the altar. Let's make a loaf of bread out of it. Let's take the grain product from your daily life, the way you think, the way you operate, your attitude, the structure of your life. Let's take that and let's make a loaf of bread and put it on the altar. Does it fit? See, in the grain field, I wear my bib overalls. In the place of worship, I wear a tie. Why do you do that? I don't want God to see me in my bib overalls. What do you think this is? See, you're not getting the connection here. That God is as vitally interested in the grain field as he is the place of worship. That this is not about how you look on Sunday morning. This is about how you operate all day long in your grain field. Because the grain field is producing the grain that's placed on the altar. I think that's phenomenal. And all week long, you are preparing a whole structure. You are preparing a whole loaf of bread. You are literally building your whole life and coming Oh, that isn't even right language, because the truth of it, he's involved in the grain field, and he's involved in the whole preparation. And if Sunday morning is anything, if Sunday morning could be a place of the demonstration of my grain field. Look at the second story. Not only the grain field, not only the showbread, but in the second story, there's the Sabbath work. And in verse 5, look at what he says. Here's the second story he tells. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Yes, I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. So he says, let me give you another illustration. The illustration is that the priests do all of this work on the Sabbath day. What kind of work? They slaughter animals. Oh, my. They light candles. Oh, my. They light fires. Oh, my. They lift heavy weights more than you can on the Sabbath day. Oh, my. They break the Sabbath day law. If you did that in the grain field, wow, they would stone you to death. But the priest does it all the time on the Sabbath day down at the church, and it's okay. Back in the day, when, you couldn't whistle in the church and all that stuff. See, I was taught you cannot work on Sunday. You cannot work on Sunday. We wouldn't take a newspaper on Sunday. Why? Because a paper boy would have to deliver it, and we will not do that. Of course, we took a Monday paper that was printed on Sunday, but that was seen to be okay. I never did figure that out. It's really hard to be consistent when you got a lot of rules, isn't it? See, this whole idea, you cannot work on the Sabbath day. But man, they would let me work like a dog. Well, you're the preacher. It's okay for the preacher to work on Sunday. That's what he's saying here. Well, sure, it's okay for the priest. He's supposed to do that. He can lift the heavy weights on Sunday. Well, sure he can. On the Sabbath day, he can light candles. You can't out in the grain field, but you can in the sanctuary if you're a priest. See, you can do all these things. You know what Jesus says here? You got to get this. He says, I want to bring you into the new covenant. I want to bring you in. That's the old covenant. I want to bring you into the new covenant. He says, you know what the new covenant is about? Oh, my dear friend, let me tell you what the new covenant is about. He says, look at verse 6, I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. He's talking about himself. That's true. How is Jesus greater than the temple? Well, he's God. That's not what he's saying. He is God, but that's not how he's greater than the temple. What's he saying? He is a man filled with God. That's what he's saying. And a man filled with God, don't you know what the new covenant is all about? The new covenant is about a fact that the temple has changed from a building in which God dwells and you come and worship in. The temple has now become you. You're the temple. In fact, let me read you a verse found in 1 Corinthians 3:16, 17, 2 verses. Look at this. You ready for this? Grab a hold of this. Think this through. Come on. Do you not know that you are the temple of God? Wow, Paul's writing that. He's looking you right in the eye and saying, hey, don't you know you're the temple of God? Wait a minute. All the stuff that goes on in the temple? Yeah, that's going on in you? Absolutely. You mean God lived in the temple? Absolutely. Now he lives in you? Why? Yeah, because you're the temple. Don't you know that you are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone, listen to this. If anyone, brother, listen to this. If anyone, are you ready for this? If anyone defiles the temple of God, God will destroy him. That's why you don't whistle in the sanctuary. No, you missed it. See, this is not the temple. The sanctuary is not the temple. What's the temple? You are. If anyone defiles the temple of God, you may want to rethink the coffee thing. If anyone defiles the temple of God, God will destroy him. For the temple of God is holy, which temple you are. You mean this room is not sacred? I am sacred? Whoa. Well, now, wait a minute. I don't just live in this temple on Sunday. I know. I take this temple to the grain field. That's true. So there's no difference between the grain field and the place of worship, because the grain field is the place of worship because I'm there and I'm the temple. Isn't that awesome? I was just a kid, up and down in my spiritual life. Couldn't seem to get a handle on it. Really wanted God. Couldn't seem to have victory. Peer pressure, all that stuff going on. Just couldn't quite seem to break through. Jesus just wasn't quite real. Just didn't quite happen in my life. Struggled. One day at noon, left the high school at the lunch hour, went across the street where the church was, went into the church. Thank God for a church that isn't locked up. Went into the church, went down in a Sunday school classroom all by myself, got down on my knees and said, God, looked up and said, God, I've had it. I'm done with this. I've looked for you. I've wanted you. I want victory in my life. I feel, then I don't. I'm in, then I'm out. I'm up, then I'm down. I can't get this figured out. God, I'm done. Either you're real or you're not real. Either you work or you don't work. Either this thing is right or it's not right. I don't know what to do, God, but I'm challenging you, God. I'm pulling the pin on you. I said, God, if you're real, be real to me, and let's get on with this, or I'm going to look elsewhere. So I'm giving you a chance, God. Did you know at that very moment there a lightning bolt came from the corner of that room and struck me right? I still got the shirt with the burn spot. No, I don't. Why? Because no lightning bolt came and there was no burn spot. Didn't feel anything. Was no evidence that God even heard me. Got up off my knees, went back to school. But I'm telling you, God did something in my life over the next month that was absolutely phenomenal. In fact, it became the foundation of everything that's going on in my own personal life to this moment. In that month, something began to happen up here, but up here as well. I began to be aware of the fact that God actually lived in my flesh. Well, if God actually lives in your flesh, where's he live in there? I don't know. I don't even know where I live in here. But I'm in here looking through these beady eyes at you. And wherever I am, he is there too. Does he live in your heart? I don't know. Does he live in your hand? Probably. Is he living in your eyeballs? I don't know. Wouldn't it be something if God would come and actually live in my flesh and share my feet and share my hands and live in my mind and share my body, and I would literally become the house, the temple. Wow. Do you realize how radical that would be? That if God actually lives inside of you and actually lives in your hand, everything your hand does, he does too. Whoa, watch what you do, hand. That gets serious, doesn't it? Because you're literally dragging God into. Is that what he's saying in this passage? I began to realize that the reason I didn't have victory in my life, hey, I'd come to an altar of prayer and I'd feel better and then it'd all go away. The reason I didn't have victory in my life is because I did not have, if God lived in my flesh, I did not have, it would be like being married and never talking to your wife. It would be like being married and coming to visit your wife on one morning a week. I wouldn't work. I realized I was taking God and putting him on a shelf, that he lived within me, and I was pushing him back and doing my thing, and every now and then when I had a real problem, I'd drag him out. He said, what would happen if you would allow me to be involved in every single bit of your life in the grain field? Not just in a sanctuary on the Sabbath day, but in your life, every single moment of your living experience. What would happen if you would allow me to participate in everything you're doing? That became such a wild idea. I'm not kidding now. That becomes such a wild idea in my head. In fact, I began to try to develop a God awareness. Every time the bell rang in school, I made myself stop and be aware that, Jesus, you live within me. Oh, you know how many times a bell rings at school? Oh, all day long, you're stopping and saying, oh, not a big prayer meeting, not, oh, God of the skies, big man upstairs, not that stuff. I'm talking about the Jesus that lives within me. Wow. And over a period of months, I began to find a God awareness going on. In fact, that got to be so much fun. I began to let God participate in everything I was doing. Boy, these are good green beans, God. That beats praying before your meal. See, we have this fancy prayer before the meal and then forget all about him and gorge our face. What would happen if you fellowshiped with God all the time you were eating? That'd be better than a prayer before. I don't think you're getting with this. Wouldn't that be phenomenal? Boy, these are good green beans. God, oh, that's a good-looking girl on the street corner, Lord. If he isn't involved in that, you're in trouble. In fact, lay this one on your brain. Have you ever been in the middle of making love to your wife and literally praying that the Jesus that lives within you would envelop her, and the whole sexual experience becomes a experience with him? That's weird. So your sexual experience is some animal thing then. And you've missed the whole point of the scriptures. And no wonder your wife feels used. Do you get what he's saying here? Do you not know that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone defiles the temple of God, God will destroy him, for the temple of God is holy. You are the temple. The temple you are, he said. Wow. So what goes on in the grain field, what goes on in the sanctuary, what you are in the grain field is what you are in the place of worship. There is no difference between the grain field and the place of worship. Why? You're the temple. Well, preacher, I'll tell you. I'll just be honest with you. I got things going on in my life I don't want God involved in. You can't have him then. You can't be Christian. You mean I can't go to heaven? Yeah, you can't. Because you can't segment him to the house of worship, and I've got the grain field. There is no difference. Come on, folks. Christianity is the involvement of Jesus indwelling you, and your flesh, your body becomes his temple, and there is no difference between the grain field and the place of worship, because you are the place of worship. Woo! I want this. I want this. Oh, Jesus. Wow. What a deal you have set up for us. That you could actually come and indwell us. You could actually come and enter into our flesh. We could actually be filled. And when we look at what this would look like, when we want to see an illustration of this, Jesus, you are the illustration. You were the first one to be filled with the Spirit. You became the visible image of the invisible God. He began to demonstrate himself in and through your life. It was phenomenal. Now you want to do that in me. Lord, every wall is down. Oh, Jesus, every barricade, I'm done with it, Lord. Hey, Lord, tear up the carpet. Get the dirt under the carpet, God. Go through the closets. Come on, God. Work in my life. Come on, Jesus. Plow through my mind. Go to the depth of my emotions. Go into my body drives. Go into my habits. Go into my whole life. Just work your way through my entire being. Because, man, there's no difference between the grain field and the place of worship. Man, I want you. Heads are bowed. This is the place of rest. This is the linkage that releases his power in your life. This linkage makes the yoke easy and the burden light. In the struggles that you're going through in your life, this is the resource that is now turned loose. It's him indwelling you. See, he wants to link with you and bring you into rest. This is not quit that, start this, don't do anything on that day. That's not what this rest is about. This rest is there's no difference between the grain field and the place of worship. And he wants to indwell you and filter his life through your being. He wants you tonight like that. Whatever barriers, whatever blockades, whatever holdouts, whatever, would you just turn him loose in your life? These are moments of seeking. Altars open. Wow. Moments of seeking. Moments of openness. Moments of, here I am. Moments of practicing his presence, living in his flow. Moments that say, everything that's been going on in the grain field, I put on the altar for you. The linkage with Jesus. Heads are bowed. Listen to it again. Do you not know that you are the temple of God? And the Spirit of God dwells in you. If anyone defiles the temple of God, God will destroy him, for the temple of God is holy. Which temple you are? Be obedient.